Thanks, Mark. So the way we have organized this content is three parts: the what, why, and how. So let me start with the what. You may be wondering why we are talking about the obvious, but we thought it's important to have a common understanding of the term microservices governance because we have seen the different levels of understanding. When you use the term governance, few people, specifically the technical community, think in terms of the technology aspects like discovery and policy enforcement and stuff. Whereas we believe governance is not just about technology. Of course, policy management, discovery, etc. is important, but you need to look at governance from a holistic perspective, which is both the functional aspects and the technical aspects. And one of the most important elements of governance is to enable and empower rather than policing, because governance is often misunderstood to be a policing function. So it's not about policing, but empowerment. Okay, now let's look at the details of the governance part, the process areas of governance. So the process areas of governance starts with the microservice candidate identification process, which you have already done. Looking at the polls, you have a very good idea in terms of the fitment. But the whole idea is to have a process to industrialize the fitment selection. And you don't want to kind of build microservices for the wrong set of use cases. So the governance helps you to streamline that. And also conducting workshops and awareness sessions, because if you are starting with microservices and if you are trying to increase it org-wide, you might want to empower the teams by conducting awareness sessions, workshops, town hall meetings, just to socialize and ease the function of governance. Because as I mentioned in my previous slide, governance is about empowerment and enablement rather than policing. So you might want to build a relationship with your teams to be able to govern effectively. Then obviously you have the technology aspects of governance. I'm sure, considering that you have already come so far in building the microservices, I don't have to explain each point, but it deals with all the elements that I've shown here. And there is also focus on the tools and frameworks part, which I'll cover in detail. Okay, moving on to the next part, it's important to see where microservice governance fits in the overall IT governance scheme. The ultimate goal of any governance is to demonstrate the business value of technology. It has to be aligned with your business objectives. So you don't want to build technology components for the sake of building technology components, right? So most organizations will have their IT governance split into different governance streams. Some of you would have integration governance. I'm sure every organization would have an architecture governance, and last but not the least, infrastructure governance. How it fits in the microservice context? Of course, when it comes to infrastructure, you're talking about cloud platforms, you're talking about things like autoscale, containerization. So there is a strong infrastructure element to it. So you don't want to have teams making their own decisions and having a very diverse environment. Of course, in some cases, it would help if a particular environment suits your needs, and then diversity is definitely encouraged in the microservices world, yes. But most organizations have a kind of a preferred technology strategy or a preferred choice, which aligns well with their existing skill basis. So it's important to kind of have all the governance functions aligned. Coming to the specific points, as I said, fitment of microservices is very important, especially considering the telco context where you have BSS and OSS in your existing estate. So most of your heavy lifting of your customer journeys is done by your existing BSS stack. So obviously we'll have a question in mind: where should I build microservices? And if I build, obviously there will be instances where there will be some element of reinventing the wheel. So there will be some logic partition between your BSS and the microservices, right? So you need to have a very clear strategy and separation approach to select when to use what. And most importantly, avoiding using technology for the sake of new technology, especially when you have new buzzwords like service mesh and micro gateways. It's easy to get carried away, especially there's a lot of buzz in the microservice industry today. A lot of vendors kind of wearing a microservice hat to reposition their products, so it's easy to get carried away and misled. And also to pick the right technology stack for microservices. Again, there are a lot of choices here, especially when you have a lot of choices, it's easy to make mistakes and end up picking up the wrong technology. So you need to have a structured way and a more disciplined way of picking the right technology stack. So some of the other important points I would like to highlight is having this decision tree. So to give you a glimpse of how the decision tree looks, so we have an example decision tree that I'll briefly walk you through towards the end of the webinar. But it's very, very important to have this decision tree because it's as I said, it's very important to kind of give direction and support to your team rather than policing. And last but not the least, it's very important to secure the business value of microservices. So the team should be able to have a conversation with the business team to see why they need to get additional funding and what success stories they have created out of microservices. Okay, now coming to the how part. Now we have seen the what and the why. Now this is where the ball starts rolling. So you need to formalize and set up the governance team. So you can't have governance in isolation. You can't have the team that's building the microservices to govern other teams. So the governance team should be a dedicated function. Usually it sits in the enterprise architecture function, but that's completely up to you in terms of how you want to organize it. I already showed you how microservice governance fits in integration governance, application governance, and the overall IT governance. Conducting org-wide sessions is very important to socialize and to kind of create awareness sessions. I'm sure you would have already, you'd be doing DevOps, and DevOps is a completely new way of working if you're following the classic waterfall model. It's not a model that's encouraged for microservices at all. Agile DevOps, continuous integration, continuous deployment, and microservices are very, very strong cohesion. Because microservices are modular, it's very important to bring in automation, because we are talking about tens and hundreds of services, and without automation, it can get quite messy. And to have the governance toolkit, which includes all the stuff that I talked about, the decision matrices, the principles, the best practices, the patterns, and last but not the least, funding models. Like if you have some shared microservices, who pays for it? So especially in a large organizational context, these elements of governance become very important. And also to roll out a pilot, because you don't want to just have all these principles in theory. You want to apply this in live projects, see what works, what doesn't work, tailor them, and industrialize and standardize them for continuous use. Okay, now how does the team structure look like? Again, this is an ideal team. It's based on roles and functions. So in your organization, if you think that two roles can be clubbed into one, please feel free to do so. But the key elements of the team is you have a technical team, which is the architecture team, both from the core microservices part and from the platform part. The microservices architect is a specialist who will be able to guide teams to decide when to use microservice frameworks. He'll help the team in doing the framework choices. And the cloud architect or the platform architect will specialize in the containers, container orchestration, autoscale, Kubernetes, all the kind of cloud native side of things. You have the service manager who will focus on the business priorities, who will build the service roadmap, will track the dependencies between services. And last but not the least, you have the business domain expert who will, and this role is an optional role. So business domain expert can bring in the business dimension of the services and make sure that the right use cases are selected, and will also assist in defining the business value of microservices. And if you see, the governed teams are your project teams, your vendors, all the teams that build applications, that build your integration flows. So the governance team will govern the life cycle of your applications and projects. Okay, moving on to the next part. Yeah, so this is a pretty important part. So this is where it's in a telco context, it's very important to look at it from your BSS OSS stack point of view and the microservices standpoint of view. So we just shown a kind of an architectural topology. So typically in telcos, your use cases are fulfilled by your existing backend systems, which is BSS OSS, your network elements, your other business applications, your third-party systems, or some in-house applications, right? So a traditional telco, when you think in terms of an integration platform, there would be some integration framework. A very traditional way of integration is to look at ESB. Now, there's not much demand for ESB. So any type of orchestration layer that's exposed through an API gateway that's invoked by your channels. So your channel is your point of engagement, and your backend is your point of record. So your kind of customer journeys are fulfilled through integration flows across these systems. But if you think of a microservice architecture, everything is self-contained. The logic for the microservice is self-contained, deployed in a container, the data resides within the container, so that you are able to scale the microservices based on the customer demand. So just wanted to kind of put together the topology to highlight a very important point, that in telcos, you can't visualize one over the other independently. There will be some amount of coexistence. And this is where you need a decision matrix to decide under what circumstances you will use the left side part of the architecture, under what circumstances you will use a classical microservice architecture. And to show the overlaps and differences, we have put together a Venn diagram that shows how API management, microservices, and the traditional integration platforms kind of fit together. Again, this is a kind of a guideline here, and basically, if you have existing investments, it's important to kind of recognize the overlaps and see how you will be able to kind of use them effectively. There will be redundancy for some time, and as long as there are fitments in one world versus the other. So I'll not go into the details here. So the key points are kind of shown here. What's interesting to know are the overlaps. So between the traditional API gateways and the microservices world, where you have the micro gateways, a micro gateway and API management both follow the policy enforcement. It's just that API management is deployed centrally, whereas micro gateways are deployed for each microservice. And for all the discovery part and the service management part, you have the service mesh frameworks. Not all scenarios require a service mesh. Again, the decision matrix will help you decide, do you really need a service mesh or not? Because there's already a lot of hype and buzz in the industry about service meshes. So I'll not go too deep into it. And traditional ESB, I don't have to even explain it. They're all the standard stuff like standard set of adapters, distributed transactions, orchestrated processes, advanced mediation flows, etc. Yeah, so this is the detailed decision matrix. In the interest of time, I'll not go into each of the points. So I handpicked some key points, some 3 or 4 points that I would like to highlight in terms of the fitment. So when you have data aggregation from multiple systems to fulfill use cases, the traditional integration approach would fit in. Whereas you have a completely self-sufficient use cases, and I'll talk about the use cases in the subsequent slides. When you have such scenarios, a containerized microservice is a good fit. And all the runtime policies such as throttling, etc., if it's required to be configured in a central gateway, and when you have a developer portal that's exposed to your partner network, a kind of an API management-based approach will be suitable. And API management and microservices definitely can coexist. Whereas if you have a very distributed architecture where the policies for microservices are pretty unique, they're not dependent on any centralized policy kind of a scenario, then you would configure a micro gateway and policies are localized within the micro gateway. And last point I would like to highlight is a very good fitment for front-end for back-end pattern. And it's a pattern that's kind of growing in popularity, where there are dedicated backends only for front-end applications. And microservice-based architecture is a very good fit for front-end for back-end applications. Okay, now talking about further drill down into the coexistence. This is where we believe all the 3 models will coexist. And the third model here that's shown is usage of third-party services, SaaS-based solutions. Like Salesforce.com, right? So most of the modern telco backend is moving to the cloud, right? So there will be use cases where you would still need to depend on legacy. You would build microservices, and you would depend on third-party SaaS services. So you need to kind of have your decision matrix very clearly organized so that you help your team decide which model to choose. Now coming to the use cases part. The use cases, order management is a very good candidate. This is something which we have done for one of our India-based telcos, where order capture, order fulfillment are very well-defined functions that require scaling of independently, and there's no tolerance for any failure. So microservice-based architecture, the kind of advantages that the microservice-based architecture and the containerization brings in is very good fit. All cloud native use cases like the digital channels, new offering for onlines and apps. If you're building and supporting any B2B third-party ecosystems, you would need to build any new native applications. So application of the BFF pattern, backend for frontend pattern using frameworks like GraphQL is a very good fit. A product catalog is a very good fit because most of the time the product catalog either lives in the BSS systems, and some telcos that we have worked with, they kind of follow a custom solution for product catalog. If you have a custom solution, it's microservice-based architecture is a good fit. Any reference data that a telco has, like more customer identity, device identity, or any customer mapping, any reference data that's common across multiple applications, they're good candidates for microservice-based architectures. B2B scenarios like CPQ, configure, price, and quotation is a good candidate. And last but not the least, network function virtualization is a good candidate as well. And last part, in terms of how we can help you, we've been doing this with telcos, banks, energies, and government agencies. So we'll help you conduct a maturity assessment of your application landscape and recommend microservice candidates. So all the decision matrices that I've showed you as a sample, those are our starting points. So we can tailor those points specific to your organization, setting up the microservice governance framework, selecting the technology stack, setting up a pilot and defining the pilot success criteria. How should your KPIs be? How you should be measuring your microservice success? Then how to customize your BSS application. So how to identify the requirements that need to be built outside BSS so that your BSS and microservice can coexist. And last but not the least, ongoing maintenance and support of your platform using DevOps in a managed services model.
Okay, so I think you need to pause and have a drink, Karthik. So I think with that we'll wrap up. If you have any more questions, please send them in right now. If there's any we haven't answered here, then we will pick up on them after the event. But good luck, everyone.